Okay, next step, which is really step 2, is open up bag 2 and then bag B, or bag B and bag B1. Sorry, I dumped everything into this tray. That's the way I like to do things. All right, landing gear we'll probably not use for a little bit because for video reasons I like to do that last. Okay, anti-rotation motor mount. Let's set those aside, and let's go into the next part. Okay, the next part basically. Page 2 of the manual shows building this idler pulley. Pretty straightforward. There are 2 specialty washers that are the spacers for this pulley. Do not confuse them with these washers in the bag. Find them. There's only 2 that are unique. And it's pretty straightforward. I don't think shoe goo or anything's needed here. These bearings press pretty well. So go ahead and put them in there. Okay, pretty straightforward. Press them together. Make sure they're flush. Everything's seated. Alright, you're going to stick your pin in, doesn't matter which way. Now the manual doesn't show using green Loctite on this pin. You can if you want, but it fits pretty well in the inner races, and these spacers are made to press on the inner race of that bearing. So go ahead and apply those. Alright, and as you see it's a tight fit on the shaft, so get them on there. And then we want to get them on so that the shaft is basically balanced between the pulley, like so. And then pretty straightforward, snap that in, okay, and put that aside. So that's basically step 2, part 1, which is the idler pulley. Alright, so set that aside and we'll come back and continue. Okay, next step is to start bolting the stuff that we have made and whatnot to the frame. So make sure you get the motor mount out. See it? The servo assembly we built. There we go. The idler pulley. Okay, let's not forget a bearing that goes into the frames here. So get that out. You will need 5 2.5 by 6 millimeter long screws, and you'll need 4 2.5 by 8 millimeter long screws. So get those, and you'll need 5 washers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's make sure we get them on the right screws. So for me, the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. Now let's also make sure we get the proper frame side out for this page of the manual. This is the left frame side, meaning if the tail's pointing at you like this, this is the frame side for the left side of the heli. Here's the nose, tail pointing it at you. Alright? So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and mount the idler pulley. Now as you'll see in the frame, bear with me here. As you'll see in the frame, what they're showing for the mounting, now you'll see 2 sets of holes here for this idler pulley. What they're showing in the mounting, to me, looks like they're having you mount it in the front set of holes. So here's the battery tray, front set of holes. So basically take it and note the orientation. The idler pulley assembly has this hoop, can't hold on to it here. Idler assembly has this hoop in the front here, right? Hoop. The hoop goes forward, so you will mount this where these 2 holes are in the frame on the forward set of holes and mount the idler pulley like so. Alright, you're going to use 2 of the 8 millimeter screws without any washers. Okay, so let's go ahead and get that mounted and we'll come back and review. Okay, so there we go. We've got the idler pulley installed on the inside of the frame, 2 screws in the forward facing holes per the manual. And the hoop part of the bracket for the idler pulley facing forward. Alright, so let's make sure we got that in right. Alright, next thing is go ahead and do the motor mount. Now in the manual they're showing you 2 of the remaining 2 of the 4 8 millimeters with washers and Loctite. Well, if you'll notice where the motor mount goes is slotted. Okay, so let's do adjust our pinion later. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put these 2 screws in without Loctite and just leave them snug so we can move this motor mount in the frame. Alright, so let's go ahead and get that in. We'll come back and continue. Okay, there we go. 2 screws with washers, the remaining 8 millimeters. Motor mount can move in the frames. Washers on the outside. Now, the motor mount is universal. It doesn't matter which way it goes. Okay, so one side. There's no top or bottom. Okay, so the next piece is to go ahead and use the remaining 6 millimeter screws and 3 washers and bearing. Now on this bearing, I'm going to go ahead and use the shoe goop method and shoe goop it into this half. It's just something I like to do with bearings that sit in plastic. and then clean up any shoe goop and get ready for when we button the other half. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, and then so we're going to mount our servo unit. Now, this is how it goes. There's a huge hole in this frame for a reason. That's to fit the servo, which is the elevator. So go ahead and run your cord through, okay, and then run this in, and this is how it would go. These two servos for aileron and pitch go toward the rear of the heli. Got it? Elevators toward the front of the heli. Output shafts toward the bottom. Remember that bottom bearing block we did. Okay, and then we'll line up the holes. Now there's 1, 2, 3 up here and 3 down here, and you'll notice these 3 that are down here have slots. Let me turn this right side up. Have slots, okay? That is where the remaining 3 washers go. So you're going to put 3 screws in the bottom with the washers, and up top it's going to be 3 screws without washers. Now what I'm going to do to get all these bearing blocks lined up, as we talked about, is I'm going to go ahead and put the 3 top screws in without washers first, and don't forget your Loctite. Remember, there are brass inserts on these blocks, so this is metal screws into metal. Go ahead and use the Loctite on these. All right, so let's get the 3 top ones in. We'll come back and review. Okay, so there we go, 3 top ones in. I did is tighten this one up and moved out and tightened these 2 just to not distort the frame in any way. Now, as you'll see, the bottom ones, you know, it's time to line up our bottom bearing plate. And that's why we left these top screws loose on the servos, which, as I said, we can get at. There's the top screws there, top screws here, no problem. So let's go ahead now, put our washers on, and go ahead and Loctite and tighten the 3 bottom screws. Okay, there we have it, 3 bottom screws in, and I made an error in the earlier segment. I said to put a screw here, 3rd one. That one is not there. We'll deal with that later when we come to it. So it's only 2 up here. This 3rd one's not in. Sorry for that. Anyway, so we come to the next step now, which is basically taking the other frame side, okay, and make sure you don't pinch any of your wires or anything, and go ahead and line it up. And what you're going to do is exactly the reverse of what we just did. Okay, get your servo wires that are not in the boom case, stuff like that. All right, what you're going to do is exactly what we did in reverse, except we've got a little bit more hardware. Okay, you're going to line this up, go ahead and put the 2 screws in, leave them loose for the motor mount, and then go ahead and put the 2 screws up here without washers. They're the shorter screws, remember, exactly like we did on the other side. 3 with washers. They're the 8 millimeters. Don't forget those. And then for now, Loctite them, but we're not going to button. We're not going to tighten it all up yet. We want to get all the screws in so everything's lined up and the frames together before we start tightening up. So let's go ahead and get those in. Okay, so there we have it. We've got the 5 6 millimeter screws, 3 with washers, 2 without, Loctited but not tightened. So at this point, you're pretty good if you can snap your frame together, make sure everything's aligned, and at this point, while holding everything snapped together, go ahead and tighten up these screws, okay? Do it kind of evenly so you don't affect the frame. All right, so on and so forth. That allows Loctite to work. If you waited too long, your Loctite might not work. So anyway, tighten those up. Your frame should be pretty square at that point. Now, what we need to do next is get out 5 nylock nuts and 5 16 millimeter long screws. That'll leave a few other items in the tray, but get out those, and they go in the following places. One second. One side of the frame, or this side of the frame that we just bolted on, takes the nut, all right? Now, it might be a little difficult to get the nut started in there. Let me show you a trick. As soon as I get out a tool. Wrong tool. All right, what you can do is put the nylock on a tool like this, and this will allow you to push it down in the frame and get it lined up. There we go. And once it's lined up, whoops, missed it. Once it's lined up in the hexagon shape, pull the tool out, and then take the 16 millimeter screw and run it in. So where the nuts go are 1, 2, 3, and then at this lower bearing block, 4 and 5. If you shoe gooped your bearing, you should have put some shoe goo on before mating this half, but go ahead and do that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nylocks and these 16 millimeter nuts, or bolts. Let's get them on there and come back and review. Okay, there we go. We've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nylock nuts with the long bolts. What I did is I tightened up from here first and moved outward. So I did these and that, and then this one, and then that one, just to make sure it didn't twist the frame. And you should have them tightened up well. Now remember, it's plastic, so don't over tighten. You're going to tighten them up until the frame's held together well, alright? Okay, the next step shows landing gear, and as I said, for video reasons, I'm going to bypass that. So we completed page 4 already. We're on to page 5. Page 6 shows the auto rotation. So we're going to go ahead and get that out. You're going to get out 2 of these set screws, and you're going to get out 2, I'm sorry, I should have had this done ready to go. You're going to get 2 8mm bolts out, the long, medium-sized one. So that gets the last 2 out of there. All that's left was the landing gear stuff and the screws for the canopy standoffs, which we'll discuss in a minute. All right, so you'll notice these set screws. They really are set screws, so they hold a tool. Okay, so what you're going to do first is you're going to put on. I need a smaller Allen than that. You're going to put these into the frame first, okay? So you're going to screw these in with Loctite, because remember, we're going into the hole here that has the brass bushing in the rear. So you're going to use Loctite, and you're going to screw them in, you know, about halfway or so, and let the Loctite dry. Reason we want the Loctite to dry is because we're going to have to thread on the plastic canopy standoffs next. So let's go ahead and get those in, and we'll come back and review. Okay, well, based on the manual, I was getting the impression by the pointed bit that the set screw went into the motor mount first. But since that's a bushing, or brass, and needs Loctite, what I found was the set screw tightens much harder into the canopy standoff. So I went ahead and used a tool, and let's see, this is a .050, and went ahead and screwed that into the canopy standoff. Now what I'll do is I'll apply some Loctite, and then use this, since it fits tight into the plastic, and use this to tighten up the frame. Okay, and then use these flat spots here on the canopy standoff with a pair of pliers or whatever, and tighten that up good. Same with this side. Even though I put this in with Loctite, it's going to be better to screw them into the canopy standoff. Alright, so do that. We'll come back and put the anti-rotation on. Okay, last but not least is the anti-rotation. Now notice there's a bulge on one side and it's flat. This flat side with this arc goes toward the back of the heli, like so. You can actually put it the other way, so be careful not to. Now if you want to, go ahead and put a little CA in the hole of this if you want to. I'm going to check the fit of this screw and see if I desire to. Yeah, it's fitting tight. I don't think CA is required. It's like a nylock, okay? So go ahead and put those 2 remaining 8mm screws in, holding the anti-rotation in. And that's basically going to complete, let me double check, their landing gear. Yeah, that's basically going to complete step 2, bag B, except for the landing gear. Alright, so we're going to put those screws aside for the landing gear and move on. By the way, one last thing, since I forgot to cover it, is remember we left these top servo screws loose, so now's the time to tighten them. So go ahead and tighten those up. You know, now that we got all the mounts in and everything, we can go ahead and tighten up the servos. That makes sure none of our servos were twisted or binding or doing anything. So go ahead, tighten up elevator and the 2 other servos, tighten those top screws. Alright, so that finishes this step. We'll move on.